This podcast should not be about taxes for sure, but there is one point that I think is interesting about taxes, and that is the concept of how are you getting paid? What is the actual alignment? And it's in line with the podcast I had a few days ago about how to get paid as a hedge fund manager. So now let's think about taxes and the proposal by Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen to somehow do a wealth tax. What does that mean? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? What does it mean for the hedge fund industry? This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's January 22nd, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 1.4%. The market's down 22 basis points. For the year, we're up roughly 22%. The market is up 2.5%. We're outperforming by 19.5%. We've been losing ground ever since last Friday. So for this week, we are down roughly 5%. We are down 7% since our peak, and the ground has been lost really mainly through the CRISPR index and a little bit also on Tesla. I think there's been some capital raises on the CRISPR side that have depressed the stocks. I spoke about this yesterday. We believe that the problem is that individuals, managers that see their fundamental business might think that their stocks are overvalued, which could be the case. We also believe that the macro environment and the actual valuation of stocks is beyond their scope, and that therefore using that as a signal is not necessarily the right thing to do. As far as Tesla is concerned, there's an earnings call next week. We believe that the earnings call will be crucial for the next couple of months of stock trading in terms of Tesla. But of course, Tesla is a company with lots and lots of different vectors that are driving the company. We believe that the most interesting side for us actually is now energy and solar, not because the car industry, the car side is not interesting or anything like that. It's just that it has been very well covered and very well discussed and very well also expectations are grounded, particularly because of Battery Day. We see less of that on the energy and solar side. Solar has been enormously profitable for investors, and I believe Tesla has not been participating on that solar side as much. So that as far as Tesla is concerned. Now let's talk about the taxes. Janet Yellen is proposing some sort of wealth tax. I think it's let's think about that. What does it mean to tax people? To tax people means that the government takes a cut of their either wealth or earnings. Typically in the US, we tax earnings and capital gains, and we tax realized capital gains. So what we're really taxing is any kind of cash flow that comes in. And we're not taxing things like wealth. We're not taxing also, let's say, your well, we actually are taxing real estate values in terms of real estate tax. So there's already a wealth tax on the real estate side. And I think that's also a very interesting concept that the government has introduced. We are subsidizing the mortgage market so people buy homes, and then we tax them through the real estate tax. So we get basically their wealth is being taxed through the real estate. So there is a wealth tax already in place. It's called real estate tax. Now, the wealth tax that Janet Yellen is proposing is much further. It would mean that, let's say, a fund like ours, although we are not selling any shares, still would have to pay taxes on an annual basis based on the mark-to-market gains and losses, etc. Let's think about that. What does that mean? Now we have a tax, a realized gain tax, which is incentivizing people to be long-term shareholders. And a wealth tax would take that incentive, would weaken that incentive because, well, if I stay in for a long time, I still compound the money that I would be paying out in tax would be compounding in my long-term investment. So now I'm giving it to the government. So there's going to be less earnings, less wealth generation by the market participants, in particular people like us that invest in disruptive technologies with large impact. The large impact, as we've discussed many times in this podcast, the large impact is in the future. So if you tax me now on my unrealized gains or on my wealth, you are taking away enormous chunks of my wealth generation of the future. And this is I think the fundamental flaw in the wealth tax, which is that you're taking away this compound strength that yeah, compound interest, compound wealth, compound of things in general, compound of knowledge, compound of labor, all these things that compound and that we really appreciate, and that's why we want to be long-term holders, because we as a society believe it's good to be a long-term shareholder, for example. And the reason we believe that is because we give people the chance to compound knowledge. We give people the chance to really make a difference on the business side. And if we start taxing that on an annual basis, then we're taking away enormous amounts of wealth generation of the future. So what I mean with that is if I have $100 now and you tax me, let's say 5%, so you take $5 away from me next, and then that $5, if you compound it, let's say by 40%, and this is roughly what our low boundary is with Tesla, it's 40% appreciation. So that's 40% over 10 years is something like 18, 16, 17, 18 times. That would be you're taking away almost $100 away from me. So the $100 that I have today, you take $5 in tax, that $5 will be almost $100 in 10 years. And that is why this is so destructive, because not just that you're taking that away, you're also, of course, not reinvesting it in the same way that I would be investing it. And the thing is this: if you didn't take those $5 away from me, then in 10 years I would have $100. Let's say I realized that, then I would pay $20 of tax. So in 10 years you get 4 times more money from me than you would be getting today. But of course you have the money today, and that, you know, sometimes it's better to have the money in the hand than the money in the future, etc. That's all fine. I get it. I just feel like it's an enormous disincentive for the economy. It's a very destructive way to manage an economy. And I think there are examples in Europe, particularly France has a wealth tax, and it's very destructive for the country. The country is not certainly not is punching way below its belt in terms of workforce, education, creativity, all these things that France is very known for, and is very strong at. They are not, absolutely not punching, or like I said, they're punching way below their belt when it comes to growth and innovation and disruption. In fact, a lot of French people, they come here to the United States because it's not, certainly not the tax per se, but I would say it's what tax really does. It starts creating alignments, and this is along the lines of what I spoke about a few days ago. The alignment, the question, how are you getting paid, is really comes down to okay, how are you getting paid, or how are you getting charged, and then you start aligning yourself. And no matter, even this is almost like a law of physics. Like it's like a Newton law, where you hit somebody and then they will react. This is how taxes act. And I think therefore particularly in the US, particularly in Silicon Valley, particularly in the areas that we are in, where there is large impact, large disruption, large new concepts and engineering practices being applied to really new things, and you try to do, let's say, decarbonize energy, you try to solve medical problems. I think having a wealth tax would be very detrimental to the alignment, to the incentive. People would still do it. I'm not saying everybody would just move to the Cayman Islands or Switzerland or something. Of course, they would still do it. It just would create a disalignment. It would create a social welfare state that, in my view, is not productive. It's also defeats the purpose in terms of social welfare. I think the best social welfare is job creation through disruption. It creates upward mobility, and that, to me, is the biggest social welfare you could have, because it gives people the opportunity to participate in wealth generation, and particularly people that maybe didn't have that opportunity in the past in terms of wealth. That's the key. Upward mobility, disruption, fundamentally new concepts. People like Elon Musk, the CRISPR revolution, give people access to wealth generation mechanics that weren't there before. And wealth generation, of course, has a negative rap, because you can generate wealth by just having wealth. So if you inherit money, you can generate wealth. Fine, I get it. That is a possibility. But in the world of disruption, in the world of Silicon Valley, in the world where we live in the world where we invest in fact, having wealth is not the key. What really compounds is knowledge and the innovation stack. The innovation stack is what generates the wealth. Now, you have to start with something. Of course, you have to start with something. You have to invest capital somewhere to start and then build an innovation stack and follow along the lines of the compound interest that the innovation stack creates. That is the wealth generation. And to tax unrealized gains would definitely disincentivize that process and change the process. And that's the negative thing. So our message here to Janet Yellen is, please don't do the wealth tax. It's not a good idea. I think there are other ways to tax the economy, in particular things like inheritance tax, real estate tax, like the kinds of things where I think consumption is being the primary reason, and investment should not be taxed as much. Consumption should be taxed more. I am all for taxing consumption. I'm talking my own book. I'm not a very frivolous person. I don't spend a lot of money. I don't consume as much as I maybe could, given the money I have. But and I think because consumption is not very helpful in the long-term compound of knowledge. It's not the path to the beginning of infinity, to use David Deutsch's word. Investment, long-term compound of knowledge, in building an innovation stack, uniqueness, creativity, those are things which are generally good for everybody. So we shouldn't be taxing the long-term effects of those types of actions. We should be trying to generate revenue elsewhere. And that would be my message to Janet Yellen, or my answer to the question of how I feel about the wealth tax. And again, this is not a theoretical tax discussion. This is a much more serious point. It is about alignment. Max Tegmark talks about the alignment problem. We have that problem every day in our society. This is not just an AI problem that the Institute for Humanity should be solving once a year when some of the richest and most interesting professors and all people like that come together. This should be a conversation we're having every day on every level, because the alignment problem is really the question of how should we organize ourselves? How should we as a humanity organize ourselves around, in particular, about how we're getting paid and how we're getting charged by people who give us a service. And the government, of course, is giving us a very important service, and that kind of service we are charged for, which is fine. There's no issue with that. The question, though, is how are we being charged for that? And that question has, like I said, different answers, and one of them, the wealth tax, is certainly not the right answer. Not the right answer if you want to align yourself with an economy, with corporations and individuals and entrepreneurs that solve difficult problems, have large impact, and improve lives of many, many people. Thank you.